If it does register as human in the DNA, is it potentially a different kind of human than us?
The Sahara today feels endless and silent, but 7,000 years ago, it held lakes, herders, and lives now erased by time. When scientists decoded the DNA of two buried women, they uncovered a vanished human lineage, forcing history to remember a world it had almost forgotten. The desert that was once alive. Long before the Sahara became a sea of sand, it stretched across North Africa as a vast green landscape shaped by rain, rivers, and seasonal abundance. Between roughly 14,500 and 5,000 years ago, a climatic phase known as the African Humid Period transformed the region into open grasslands filled with lakes, migrating animals, and human communities that followed the rhythm of water rather than the fear of drought. Herds of antelope crossed valleys that are now barren rock, while fishermen worked shorelines that have long since vanished beneath dunes. The land felt less like a boundary between worlds, and more like a living corridor connecting cultures across the continent. In the southwestern corner of modern Libya, hidden within a rocky shelter called Takarkori, traces of this forgotten world survived where almost nothing else did. Archaeologists would later find burials, tools, and signs of long-term occupation, revealing that people once built stable lives here instead of passing through as temporary wanderers. The idea that human remains could endure in such a harsh environment seemed unlikely because heat and shifting temperatures usually destroy organic material long before it can be studied. Yet the same dryness that erased vegetation eventually protected what the climate left behind, sealing fragments of human history beneath layers of sand. As researchers began to understand the scale of what the Green Sahara once supported, the question shifted from how people lived there to how much of their story had survived. That curiosity set the stage for an excavation that would turn a remote shelter into one of the most important genetic windows into humanity's distant past. The discovery beneath the sand. The modern story of Takarkori began in 2003 when an archaeological team led by Professor Savino di Lernia from Sapienza University of Rome arrived at the remote shelter to investigate signs of early pastoral life. On the second day of excavation, their tools brushed against a human mandible buried beneath compacted sand, revealing the first hint that the site held something far more extraordinary than pottery fragments or animal bones. As the layers were carefully removed, researchers uncovered a burial area containing 15 individuals, including women and children, positioned in ways suggesting ritual care and long-term occupation rather than a temporary campsite. Among these remains, two women stood apart for a remarkable reason. The extreme dryness of the environment had naturally mummified parts of their bodies, preserving skin, ligaments, and soft tissue in a way rarely seen in hot desert climates. For scientists accustomed to ancient bones reduced to brittle fragments, the preservation felt almost improbable, offering a rare chance to examine human remains that still carried biological information beyond skeletal structure. Yet this discovery also presented a daunting problem because heat rapidly destroys ancient DNA, and previous attempts to recover usable genomes from similar North African contexts had repeatedly failed. Years later, an international team led by archaeogeneticist Nada Salem at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology attempted what many believed would be impossible. By extracting material from teeth and dense leg bones, researchers managed to recover and sequence complete genomes from the two women, a technical achievement described by geneticist Johannes Krauss as nearly miraculous. The moment the data appeared on their screens, expectations grounded in geography and existing models of ancestry guided their assumptions. What they believed they would see seemed obvious, but the genetic results soon challenged nearly every prediction they had made. The DNA result that broke the model. When the Takarkori genomes were first compared against hundreds of ancient and modern populations, researchers expected to find clear genetic ties to sub-Saharan Africans, whose homelands lay just beyond the green corridor that once connected the Sahara to the rest of the continent. Geography and climate suggested centuries of interaction, migration, and intermarriage, especially during a period when lakes and grasslands made movement easier than at almost any other time in North African history. Instead, the results arrived like a quiet contradiction to everything the models predicted, revealing that the two women carried no measurable sub-Saharan ancestry at all. The surprise deepened as scientists searched for their closest relatives in the ancient record. Rather than matching nearby populations, the Takarkori genomes align most closely with 15,000-year-old hunter-gatherers from Tafaralt Cave in Morocco, a group separated by both distance and time, but sharing a deeply rooted North African genetic signature. This lineage had long been suspected from faint traces in modern DNA studies, yet it had never been directly observed in preserved human remains, leading researchers to describe it as a ghost population, a branch of humanity inferred mathematically but missing from the physical record. Suddenly, these two women provided concrete evidence that the ghost was real. The implications reached far beyond regional ancestry. If a population could remain genetically distinct for tens of thousands of years while living in a region open to movement and trade, then the standard narrative of constant mixing required reconsideration. Researchers realized they were not simply looking at isolated individuals, but at representatives of a long hidden lineage that survived alongside other cultures without disappearing into them. As the team pushed further into comparative analysis, another layer of the story began to emerge, suggesting that the roots of this lineage reached far deeper into the earliest chapters of human migration than anyone had anticipated. A lineage frozen in time. To understand how unusual the Takarkori genomes truly were, researchers compared them with some of the oldest known human DNA outside Africa, including individuals from Zlatý Kum in the Czech Republic who lived roughly 50,000 years ago during the earliest expansion of modern humans into Eurasia. The results suggested that the ancestors of these Libyan women shared deep connections with populations linked to that first wave of migration, placing their lineage close to a moment when humans were just beginning to spread across the world. Instead of following the same path of mixing and diversification seen elsewhere, this branch appeared to have remained largely isolated in North Africa, preserving genetic characteristics that had faded or vanished in most other populations. One clue supporting this ancient connection appeared in their Neanderthal ancestry. The Takarkori women carried only a small fraction of Neanderthal DNA, around 0.15%, far lower than the levels typically found in modern non-African populations, but higher than most sub-Saharan groups. This pattern suggests that their ancestors encountered Neanderthals early in human migration history, before later waves of interbreeding increased that genetic signal in Eurasian populations. In effect, their DNA captured a snapshot of an early evolutionary moment, frozen in time and preserved through millennia of relative isolation. The human implications of such continuity are difficult to overstate. While civilizations rose and fell across the ancient world, this lineage endured in the Sahara, maintaining a stable genetic identity across climate shifts, technological changes, and contact with neighboring groups. Researchers described the population as unusually persistent, a rare example of long-term genetic continuity in a world where movement and mixing often erased older lineages. Yet the paradox grew stronger as archaeologists examined the material culture surrounding the burials, because the people who remained genetically distinct were clearly not culturally isolated. And that contradiction would reshape ideas about how civilization itself spreads. Civilization without migration. The archaeological evidence surrounding the Takarkori burials revealed a community that was deeply connected to the wider world, even if their DNA suggested long-term isolation. Researchers found signs of pastoral life, including the management of sheep, goats, and cattle, alongside pottery styles linked to regions far beyond the Libyan shelter. These artifacts showed that ideas, tools, and practices traveled across the Green Sahara through trade routes and seasonal encounters, creating networks of exchange that allowed knowledge to spread without requiring large movements of people. The community was not cut off from surrounding cultures, yet it maintained a distinct genetic boundary that challenged assumptions about how innovation normally spreads. For decades, archaeologists believed that pastoralism moved across North Africa primarily through migration, with herding populations from the Near East, physically carrying animals and agricultural knowledge into new territories. The Takarkori genomes complicated that narrative because they showed no clear ancestry connected to Near Eastern farmers or other groups typically associated with the spread of domestication. According to researchers like Johannes Kraus and Savino da Lernia, the evidence suggested a different model in which local populations adopted new technologies through contact rather than replacement, learning from neighbors while remaining biologically separate. This distinction reshaped the story of cultural change, emphasizing exchange and adaptation over population turnover. The idea that civilization can spread through shared knowledge rather than shared bloodlines adds a human dimension to the discovery. It suggests that communities may choose what to adopt while preserving identity, creating a cultural mosaic that does not always leave obvious genetic traces. At Takarkori, pottery styles from sub-Saharan regions and the Nile Valley coexisted with a lineage that stayed remarkably stable, illustrating how communication can cross boundaries that biology does not. Yet even a society capable of maintaining that balance faced forces beyond human control, and the landscape that once sustained this experiment in coexistence was already beginning to change. The world that erased them. The end of the Takarkori story was not marked by conquest or sudden collapse, but by a slow environmental transformation that reshaped the entire Sahara. As the African humid period faded, rainfall declined, and lakes began to shrink, turning fertile grasslands into dry plains that could no longer support large herds or permanent settlements. Over generations, the ecological foundation that sustained these communities weakened, forcing people to move, adapt, or merge with neighboring groups as water sources disappeared. Climate change did not erase the population in a single moment. It gradually dissolved the conditions that allowed their long isolation to continue. Genetic evidence suggests that as the desert expanded, the descendants of this ancient lineage were increasingly absorbed into broader North African populations, with whom they had long traded but rarely intermarried. Later, Bronze Age back migrations from Eurasia brought new genetic waves into North Africa, replacing much of the earlier ancestry and leaving only faint traces of the Takarkori-related lineage in modern populations. This means the world preserved in those two mummies represents not simply a rare survival, but one of the last direct genomic windows into a branch of humanity that was almost entirely overwritten by later population movements. Without their preservation, scientists might never have known that such a lineage endured for so long. The realization changes how researchers interpret the silence in genetic records, reminding them that absence often reflects loss rather than non-existence. Entire populations can disappear from modern DNA while leaving behind cultural echoes and scattered archaeological clues. As the Sahara transformed into the vast desert known today, the people of Takarkori became part of a larger human story, their distinct identity fading into the broader currents of history. Yet beneath the sand, evidence of their existence remained, waiting for science to uncover what climate had hidden. The silence beneath the Sahara. The discovery at Takarkori has changed how scientists look at the Sahara itself, transforming it from an empty landscape into a vast archive still waiting to be read. Researchers believe that countless rock shelters and buried sites remain hidden beneath dunes stretching across Libya, Algeria, Chad, and Niger, each potentially containing preserved remains from the Green Sahara era. Advances in archaeogenetics now allow scientists to recover information once considered permanently lost, meaning future excavations could reveal additional lineages that challenge the current understanding of human migration and ancestry. Every new genome has the power to rearrange the branches of the human family tree. What makes the Takarkori discovery especially powerful is how it reframes the idea of isolation. These women were not relics disconnected from history, but participants in a networked world whose cultural exchanges left visible traces even as their genetic identity remained distinct. Their story demonstrates that human history is not a simple chain of replacements, but a layered landscape of coexistence, adaptation, and gradual transformation shaped by climate and choice. Researchers like Harold Ringbauer have emphasized that a single genome contains many ancestral stories, reminding us that each discovery expands rather than closes the narrative. As desert archaeology pushes deeper into previously inaccessible regions, The silence beneath the Sahara begins to feel less permanent and more like a pause between revelations. The next excavation may uncover another community thought lost, another lineage that survived unnoticed for thousands of years, and another reminder that the history written in our DNA is still incomplete. That possibility carries the story forward, guiding it toward a final reflection on what these ancient lives mean for us today. Beneath a desert that once held rivers in memory, two women carried a story humanity almost lost forever. Their DNA reminds us that history survives in fragments, waiting to be heard again, and that every discovery reshapes who we believe we are. Subscribe to keep exploring the past.